All right, so we got a lot of you who weren't here last week, so I'm going to give you a very quick review, and I'm going to say, Jake, you don't get to answer. So just so we're clear. So we're talking about the book of Revelation because somebody via Facebook asked if AI was the Antichrist. And I'm like, and rather than make you sit for 2 weeks before I finally get the answer, I'm just going to tell you, as far as I can tell, no. But I'm going to explain why I think that, okay, rather than just go, well, no. And then you go, well, you didn't tell me why. I still kind of think it would be cool if Skynet were the Antichrist and the Terminator were the beast and all that. And then so Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm sure his name adds up to 666 somehow. And I mean, nature itself tells you, right? I'm going to raise that just a bit. So to do this, I've got to talk about the book of Revelation. And as part of that, we're going to talk about, and this is what I did last week, so you can catch that eventually online. And if you really want to dive into this, Steve Gregg wrote a 600-page book called Revelation 4 Views, and knock yourselves out. But it's 600 pages. And he is a very line upon line teacher, so it will be a commitment if you get that and read through it. All right, so Revelation was written in which century? I'm going to ask those who were here last week, or you can take a guess if you know, or don't know. You can answer if you know, or you can guess if you don't. Shout it out. That is incorrect. It was written in the first century. Right? I mean, he was one of the apostles. He walked with Jesus. If he's still kicking around in like 150 AD, there's something wacky going on, right? Okay, so it was written in the first century. Written by John. My son was around back then, and he definitely had a... John the Apostle was added to the canon of Scripture. Anybody know this, when that was done? Council of Carthage. You remember, Charles? 397 AD. So that's basically 300 and some years of the book being accepted some places and not others, and they're debating, and they finally officially add it to the New Testament canon in 397. And that gives us not a whole lot of information of what the early churches thought about it, because a lot of them didn't even accept it as scripture. So you treat things that are not scripture or might not be scripture differently than you treat scriptures when you're doing commentaries or teaching or anything else. So we really, not until about 400 AD did we start to see some real commentaries on the book of Revelation, which is a big gap, considering the U.S. is coming up on its 250th anniversary, and we're talking about another 150 years beyond that, and think how much we don't know about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Federalist. Well, we might know those. How many of you read the Federalist Papers? Yeah, me neither. Jake, you're a history major. Why haven't you read the Federalist Papers? You've read some of them. Okay. All right. We'll let that go. So Revelation is a unique book. It fits into 3 literary categories. Anybody name me one of those? It is prophecy. It's apocalyptic. That's correct. And the third one? Say again? It's a letter. Or if we're speaking Christianese, it's an epistle. I like English, though. It's a letter. And so each of those things have some inherent properties and implications to them. The fact that it's a letter means it was written by someone to someone and was therefore needed to be understood by the recipient of the letter, right? I could write this whole letter, send it to Jake, and it could just be about, I don't know, outer Mongolia in the the 25th and a half century. No, 24th and a half century. That's right, Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. So, and he goes, and I say, this is to encourage you in your life and the situation you're dealing with. And he goes, this is Daffy Duck in a cartoon. What in the world? It's not really meaningful other than it's funny because it's Looney Tunes, but that's not really going to help him with whatever he's dealing with at the moment. So it's a letter, so it's got to be relevant to the recipient. Make sense? I mean, I know this is really, really complex philosophical stuff we're getting in here too. It's a prophecy. So a prophecy can have a couple of different attributes, and these I touched on last week, but I don't really expect you guys to have remembered them, but I'm going to give you a chance just in case. What are the two things? Both start with F. What are they? Future, so it would foretell is the word I'm looking for. That's good. And the other thing that it does, if you go and read Isaiah or you read a bunch of the Old Testament prophets, how much of what they're saying is predictive? Really not all that much. What are they actually doing? What did Jonah do in Nineveh? He was preaching, right? So he was forthtelling what's going on. Here's what the Lord sees you doing. Here's what's going to happen because you are in gross sin and smack each other with fishes. Wait, that's VeggieTales. Sorry, that's they didn't smack each other with. They might have, but that's not why they got rebuked. Right. So there's a forthtelling. Here's what God sees. There is a foretelling. Here's what's going to happen because of it. Good or bad. A lot of times bad, but sometimes it was good. You know, like Isaiah, it'd be like 43rd chapter. Here he starts to talk, it's the messianic stuff in Isaiah. And then the third one is Jesse's, who is the apocalypse. It's apocalyptic literature, and apocalyptic literature has some characteristics. One of which is we don't have that style in Western literature. So it's not something we are super familiar with. We are familiar with other styles. You might be familiar with a poet named E.E. Cummings, who has a very unique style and uses the shape of the words in his poetry. It's really cool. But if you just wrote them out, they wouldn't be nearly as powerful as the way he writes. There are science fiction genre, where somebody like me or Jennifer or Lisa or anybody else who is related to me might be very familiar with that. There's certain things that you see in science fiction. Do you have faster than light travel? Probably. How do you explain it? And you've got warp drive, hyperspace, wormholes, but you've only got a few, right, that you can use. But you can use any of them, and those of us who read science fiction all understand what it means, and okay, I get that. An apocalypse has a bunch of features that those who are familiar with an apocalyptic story understand. Does anybody remember what some of those are? There's like half a dozen. What? What about beast?
There are creatures to describe people.
That can happen, yes.
It often has a guide for the mission.
What kind of guide?
Spiritual guide.
Be more specific. An angel, yes. Some kind of angelic or supernatural guide, not a spirit guide, because that means something different, okay? That's why I wanted to make sure we're talking about that. Yes. Other things. It is a type of, okay. It's a poetic style, right? It's not a literal style. It's very sensational. You have 100-pound hailstones and dragons and beasts and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And creatures with 7 heads and 10 horns and eyes on, and it's just this wild stuff, right? It's very sensationalistic, poetic. Also, it tends to be written to people who are being persecuted. And you have several hundred years of apocalyptic literature dating back to about the time of Malachi and then going through the early church. And a lot of it was to the Jews, but there's some early Christian apocalyptic literature as well. And so Revelation definitely falls into that category of having all kinds of wild stuff in it. So there are your 3 areas or types of literature that Revelation falls into. So now we're going to get into the fun stuff. Over the last couple of millennia, Christians have held 4 basic views of the book of Revelation. Okay? You probably fall into the first category. Because that's what's taught in America primarily. Charles, please take your arms out of your shirt. Don't stretch it out. Thank you. And that is called the futurist view. So it's not entirely the entire book of Revelation, but we basically break the book into 3 sections. When Jesus spoke to John, he told him in Revelation 1:19, he said, "Write what you have seen, what is now, and what will take place after." So write what you have seen is chapter 1. Hi, this is John. This is the revelation that Jesus gave to me. This is what I just saw. Chapters 2 and 3 are what is. These are the letters to the 7 churches. Right? Pergamum, Smyrna, Laodicea, Philadelphia. I don't remember them all. Ephesus, yeah, you know, the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. And as I'm not really going to hammer on those, I just want you to be aware that they're there. And then there's the things to come, which starts in chapter 4 and goes through basically the end of the book, chapter 22. And the thinking is, okay, John saw this stuff in chapter 1, and he was writing to the church, those 7 churches, and then the rest of the book of Revelation is going to be fulfilled at the very end. There will be all of these crazy events. There will be a rapture. Most people believe in the rapture who are futurists. In America, it's mostly pre-trib. Start of the tribulation, the church is raptured out. There are people that believe in post-trib. The church goes through the tribulation and then gets taken out. There's mid-trib, which after 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, then the church gets pulled out before the judgments start falling. But they're all basically, everything is yet to come. And this is a very popular view in America, in a lot of the Western church. It's less so in Britain. The British church has a different take, which we'll get to. But how many of you are basically, that's what you were taught, that the book of Revelation is prophecy of how the earth is going to end? Yeah, I was. That's how I was raised. This has some appeal to it. It's kind of cool. Gives you a way to read the headlines and try to connect dots and go, okay, well, this is how it's all playing out, and this is how it's going to be. And I'm pretty sure Ronald Wilson Reagan, whose 3 names had 6 letters each, that he's the beast, and that, I mean, obviously wasn't true, but that was kicked around back in the 80s. People said stuff like that. But, people have been speculating as to the end of the world for probably as long as the world has been. Back in the 70s, so I'm going back in time, there was a guy named Hal Lindsey who wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. And Hal Lindsey had this theory that the generation that saw Israel restored as a nation would still be on the earth when the end came. Israel was restored as a nation in 48, but yeah, right in there. So his prediction was, we're going to have a tribulation. So the rapture is going to have to be by, with a 40-year generation, the rapture is going to have to be by 1981. Sorry guys, you missed the rapture. You must be going to hell. I don't know what to say. And then, but he got on national TV and predicts this, and then swing and a miss, the mighty Casey has struck out, and that's so much for his credibility, right? And then a few years later, there was a little pamphlet called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Come in 88. This is right about the time I'm getting out of college with a math degree. And I'm looking at the appendix, and the guy who wrote it was a NASA engineer. Okay, so it wasn't just some guy who didn't know anything about mathematics, but I'm looking at his formulas going, I don't think that works. I think you're missing something here. And obviously, nobody got raptured in 1988. And I had people, man, they're like, you've got to be ready. You've got to have all this. You got to print, and this was free to copy and distribute and everything. And I'm like, yeah, you don't really believe this. Like, I do, I believe it. Okay. Sign your house over to me effective September 30th. Because he had this narrow range. It was like the 21st, 23rd of September. I'm like, just, if you believe that, your car and house, just go ahead. I got no takers. I'm like, you don't believe it. You're just on a bandwagon or something, but you don't really believe that this is going to happen. And so, This has gone on for centuries. Back in the 1860s, there was a group, the Millerites. I'm not making this up. You can check it out in Christian History magazine. The Millerites, and they had this theory that basically put the end in 1860. That's kind of a weird time, isn't it? 1860, why would you pick that? Well, it turns out that the Protestant churches had a different view of the book of Revelation. They had what's called a historicist view of the book of Revelation, and that is that Revelation was unfolding throughout history. And it ran on a principle called a day for a year. Right? And so where do you get that from? Well, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt and they sent spies into the land, the spies were in the land for 40 days. They came out and then they rebelled, and God said, fine, for every day you were in there spying it out, you're going to get to wander in the desert for a year. And so 40 days, 40 years. That's true. There is absolutely no reason to think that's a way to interpret prophecy. None. That wasn't a prophecy. That was a judgment. Okay, but I don't think that defines a principle. What's that? Yeah, those webs. Jake, get that phone with your web shooter. So, okay. The other place we've got is the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel gets one of those weird prophetic commands from God, and he says, okay, I want you to lie on your side for I don't know, some long period of days, and this is for the sins of Israel. And then I want you to lie on your other side for some other long period of days, and this is for the sins of Judah, and that was 1 year for a day. He's like, each day you're lying on your side represents one of the years of the sins of the nation. Okay. It's just one of those trippy things. It's like, all right, that's fine. And where's the principle to interpret other days to years involved here? Because there's plenty of other times where God says a day and it means a day. There's plenty of times when he says a year and it means a year. And so I don't see a generalizable principle of interpretation of prophecy that you can just say, well, 1 day, 1 year. And the whole, a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like a day. I mean, that is so misapplied so often, but I'll cover that later. So the basic understanding of the historicist is people, some still hold it, that the Antichrist is the institution of the papacy. So, anybody know the first pope of the Catholic? Well, no, not Peter, but the first, the Bishop of Rome, who was first. What? I have no idea what name you're saying. Leo? No. Gregory the Great. And Gregory the Great was the Bishop of Rome I think he took over in 590 and went through about 600 AD. And so if you do the math, and you take that 120 days that the beast is supposed to reign, and if literally that's 3.5 years. But if you do the day to a year, that's 1,260 years. So you go 1,200 plus 600 is 1,860. So that's why they picked 1860. Okay, no, this is true. This is true. So that's why the Millerites picked 1860, because they figured 600 plus 1,260 years, 1860. Obviously, it was a swing and a miss, and they called it from that point forward the Great Disappointment. Really? Why don't you just call it, we were wrong? Oops. So after about that time, the historicist view started to fall out of favor because the 1260 years just wasn't lining up anymore, and every year that goes by, it's more and more clear. Now, maybe I'm sure I could come up with, but Gregory the Great was actually loved God and did a lot of great stuff and sent the missionaries out to bring the gospel to the Saxons, and he did all this stuff, and he was actually a man of God. And so maybe we can go through and find some point at which we look at the papacy and go, yeah, I think probably right about here they kind of lost that initial Christian thing where now they're trying to be a secular power and all this stuff. But maybe we could do that. Maybe we could come up with a way to do that. I don't like to do twisted scriptures, pretending I'm Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. But, I mean, maybe you could. I don't think it's going to be worth your while because all you're going to do is set a new date. And then when that gets blown by, you'll have to set a new date. And this is what the Jehovah's Witnesses and other cults have been doing for all of my life, and probably a lot longer than that. So I don't know. That one looks hard to me at this point. Now, since the Protestant Christians looked at the papacy and the Roman Church as the Antichrist. Some of the Jesuits were not real happy about that. I know that's a shock that the Jesuits, one of the most militant, if not the most militant order of monks ever, were not happy. And there was a Jesuit priest named Francisco Ribera, not Rivera, but Ribera, in 1585, wrote a commentary on the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse, as it's written in the Catholic Bible. And he declared that the Antichrist is not the Pope, or the papacy, or the Roman Church. It is, in fact, an individual who will be revealed at a later time at the end of the world. And that is literally where the futurist belief started, in almost the year 1600. So it's not really a belief that was held by the early church or the middle church. And since it was a Catholic doctrine, defending the Pope, the Protestant theologians wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Until I'm going to make sure I get my dates right. 1827, Samuel Maitland, who was the librarian to the Archbishop of Canterbury in the Church of England. And do you know the history of the Church of England? Henry VIII wanted a divorce. The Pope told him, nah, can't happen. He goes, all right, fine. We'll split off our own church. I'll be the head of the church. I'll set up the Archbishop of Canterbury to be the guy who actually runs it and do all this stuff, but basically I can have a divorce if I want to. And he was not a good man. But the Church of England, the Anglican Church, the Church of England is officially headed by the sovereign. So it was Queen Elizabeth, now it's King Charles. He's officially the head of the church. Practically, he's not, except that he legally is. The monarchy is an odd thing over in England, so I'm not going to try to get into all that. I don't even really understand most of it myself. But the Church of England is very similar to the Catholic Church in structure and belief and practice. And this guy, Maitland, decided that this commentary by Ribera actually made sense. So he was the first of the Protestants to start to popularize this view. And by 1830, John Nelson Darby, anybody heard that name? Yeah, the Plymouth Brethren movement. He was there with George Mueller is another name you might know from that. So actually, I wound up digging into this a little bit, getting ready for this. There's really quite something that was going on. But he incorporated the futurist view of the book of Revelation into his dispensational theology. And so as dispensationalism spread through the Western church and the Protestant church, so did the futurist view of the book of Revelation. Now, there's probably good reason for that. The futurists tend to try to interpret things literally. So when you hear about 100-pound hailstones falling and killing a third of the earth or a quarter of the earth, whatever it was, and you hear about the sea turning to blood, a third of the waters, and it kills a third of the fish and all this, they tend to believe that's literally true. And Western thought tends to gravitate toward the literal. Eastern thought doesn't necessarily go that way. Most of the world doesn't necessarily go that way, but Western thought certainly does. So that has more of an appeal in the West, but you'll find that worldwide, it's not so much. Of course, it's not really true that futurists are literal, because when John is told to look and see the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and he looks up and he sees a lamb that looks like it's been slain, and we all understand that's Jesus. Jesus doesn't really look like a lamb that's been slain, and I don't know anyone who actually thinks he literally does. And the beast, whose number is 666, is a man. We don't really believe he's a beast. We believe he's a man. We believe the Antichrist is a man. We don't believe that. So there's a lot of the symbolism that is understood to be symbolism. We don't, yeah, Richard.
Seven is perfection, and 6 is imperfect. So 7 would be God, and we are 6, because we are imperfect.
Okay, we're 6 because we were created on the 6th day. I think that's the actual origin, but
That's an imperfect number.
it's the product of the first 2 primes. How can it be imperfect? And 7 is the number of completion.
And perfection.
Okay. I'm not talking about numerology this morning, though, but thank you. Where was I at? Scripture, the Maitland, Darby. Oh, the literal, yeah, and because that's one of the things that tends to appeal to Westerners is this is the literal approach, except it's really not. It's more literal, but it's still, you can't really say it's literal. Then there's a couple other difficulties you've got with the literality of this thing. And that would be Revelation 1, first 3 verses. So the revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending the angel to his servant John, who testifies to everything he saw. That is the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take it to heart what is written in it. Take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near. Revelation, Daniel 12:4. Remember, Daniel was told to seal up the words of this prophecy because they were for the time of the end. You, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. But Daniel gets told to seal them up. In Revelation 22:10, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this scroll because, again, the time is near. So a futurist has to deal with that. So now you can't literally interpret this part of the book if you want to believe in the future stuff, because there's 3 different instances where he says it's about to happen, the time is near. So what do we do with that? Well, we've got to symbolize those. Then we've got to say, well, with the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day. So he's really saying it's a few thousand years off. Yeah, except he wasn't writing the letter to God, right? He was writing it to people. It's got to matter to the people who are receiving it. So, and is there anything in there? Don't seal up the words of the prophecy because the time is near. But to Daniel, he said, seal it up because it's a long way off. Do we think God is an idiot? Honestly, do we think he can't tell the difference between a day on earth and 1,000 years on earth? No, that a day is like 1,000 years is to explain that time is not a problem for God. He doesn't age. He doesn't forget. He doesn't misplace. He doesn't walk into the room, turn around, wonder what he went in there to get, like I might do occasionally. I'm sure none of you have that issue ever. God doesn't do that stuff. And if you're going to say 1,000, you might as well say 1,000,000 years. Well, maybe this is talking about 10,000 years in the future or 100,000 years in the future. Who knows? If you're going to go with that, I mean, that's just Peter said it once, one time. He didn't. That is not a time conversion for when you talk about prophecy. And people want it to be, but it's not. So there you have it. Don't even know what more to say about that. Okay, so that was the historicist view and the futurist view. The historicist has the same problem with those verses, right? Because it's like, well, what are you going to do? It's about to be fulfilled. Well, 1,000 years is like a day. Or they come up with this a day for a year principle that they throw in there, and then when the clock of history blows past their end date, then they've got to readjust. So the third method, or third way of understanding the book of Revelation, is called the preterist understanding, which basically holds this: it's already done. That most preterists hold that the book of Revelation was actually written under the reign of Nero, and we talked last week about how it might have been under Domitian, which would mean the preterist view couldn't happen because that was in the 90s, not the 60s. But the preterist view actually does make a lot of sense when you start looking at the destruction of Jerusalem around 70 AD. And you see that the temple was in fact destroyed, that the Romans were chucking 100-pound rocks at Jerusalem. And because they were easy to see against the clouds in the sky, they whitewashed them. So they were 100-pound white rocks falling from the sky, which is an awful lot like a symbolic hailstone. And this comes from Josephus, who was actually a Jew who wrote the history of the Jews and the Jewish war and was actual witness to these things happening. The sea turning to blood was probably from a time when, in that same war, where the Romans were pursuing the Jews by sea, and the Jews, they were jumping out of their boats trying to swim to the Romans to get mercy, and the Romans would cut their heads and hands off. And in the morning, you could just see the bodies and the blood all over, and it was like it had turned the sea to blood. And that would fit with the sea turning to blood. And so you can go through and map out most of the stuff. And we don't have all the details of what happened in the destruction of Jerusalem. But we do have a Roman general go into the temple and set himself up to be worshipped as the abomination of desolation. And on it goes through. And it seems like that really does seem to fit, although it is completely vulnerable to when the book was written. If the book was written under Nero and these events were still to come, then it fits very well. If the book wasn't written till 90 AD under Domitian, well, you don't get to write a prophecy about what happened 25 years ago. Sorry, you just don't get to. So it's the only view here that is particularly vulnerable to needing to know when the book was actually written. There's a lot of evidence that it was written in the 60s, and there's some evidence that it was not, that it was written later. And so there you go. And you have to examine the facts and come up with your best information. Now, one thing I want to point out at this time is that, as cool as this may be, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Okay, so if it all happened in the fall of Jerusalem, it's history. It doesn't mean I live any different. I need to be ready for Jesus to come back, period, end of story. If it's futurist, if there's going to be an Antichrist, and if he's going to come, and if he doesn't, what am I going to do about it? Because God's already set it out by his own authority and predicted it and said, this is what's going to happen. What am I supposed to do to change that? Well, do I have, even if I could change it, do I have the wisdom to do anything? That's a big no there. I don't. I don't have a clue. And if the Lord said it's going to happen, then where would I come off thinking I should change it? I mean, he knows a lot more than I do, right? I mean, a lot of this is his sovereign judgment. Okay? So, and this is one that really drives me a little wacky. This is like the 88 Reasons thing, right? Like, you don't even, what does it matter? If Jesus is coming back and we know he came, he says, I'm going to come back a week from today. And he showed up in person right here, and we go, wow, that's cool. If you're going to change how you live, you should change anyway. Right? You should be ready. If it's in the future, I should be ready. If it's in the past, I should be ready. If it's being processively revealed throughout history, I'm still going to serve Jesus the same way, either way. So I like to know what's true. I like to understand, but honestly, what does it matter at a practical level whether I believe it, whether I'm a preterist or a futurist or a historicist or even an idealist? And this is the fourth one, and that is that the book of Revelation isn't talking about actual events. It's talking about eternal truths like the sovereignty of God, the judgment of sinners, the way in which God acts with the earth, the judgment of Satan, that Satan is after the church and trying to destroy it, and Jesus is bringing deliverance and those kind of things, and that they see the whole book of Revelation as allegorical, like a pilgrim's progress for the church. Yeah, I guess. I mean, you could believe that and any of the other three. So I think that's true that there are eternal truths represented in the book of Revelation. Was that the primary writing of the book, though? And since he's talking about, and again, this is where there's a little difficulty with that, saying this is the way it is that Jesus, who's the one who inspired John, told him what to write, said, these are things that are going to happen soon. So what do you do with that? You can hold on to the eternal truth idea, but I don't see how that's enough if you're going to be true to what the Bible actually says. And so I'll just tell you, I come down in the preterist camp. I think it's done. I think it's been basically fulfilled in the fall of Jerusalem. And I also come down believing that it does, in fact, illustrate eternal truths that we can draw from. Now, so I went through this last week, but because it's fun, I'll just tell you again. Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, unlike English, use the same characters in their alphabet for their numerals. Their numerals are also alphabetic characters. And if you translate Caesar Nero from Latin into Hebrew, not Greek, but Hebrew, and you add up the numbers of his name, it is 666. It takes wisdom to understand. And so it is my belief that Nero was the Antichrist. And I mean, what did he do other than just impale Christians and light them on fire for his parties? And I mean, he wasn't. So I think it's Nero. I think that was what was in the text. I don't think it's clear. So you notice I'm saying this is what I think. I've given my reasons, but I do not believe that AI and Skynet and the Terminator, as much as I might want them to be, are the fulfillment of the book of Revelation. So that's my answer to is AI the Antichrist?